Welcome to Tell the Damn Story, the show that explores the many ways to navigate the successes and failures that aspiring and struggling writers face to make your journey that much easier.
Hey, Alex Simmons, how are you, buddy? How's it going? I know some of you just went, oh, damn, what's she doing? I apologize. I'm actually trying to overcompensate here for a little lull in the energy. We went to bed early because we knew we were recording today. Not me and Alex.
Wait. Well,
me and Glorious.
Yeah, right.
Glorious.
Him and his fair lady. Yes, right.
And then I heard a noise just around midnight. And I got up, it was the dog. So I had to go do some stuff with the dog. And when I went out, I noticed that one of my sons wasn't home. Not your godson, his twin brother. And I know he had to attend his school's graduation and whatever, but he wasn't going to be home this late. So I went back into the bedroom and checked the phone, and there was a text from him, and he was at the ER. Yeah, it turned out to be everything was great, and it was something that was addressable. And as a father, that's the end of sleep.
Yeah. Till he gets home, and
and he comes home a little after 1, and then Glorious and I are both up, and we want to know every detail. And unfortunately for him,
shining in his eyes.
No, but unfortunately for him, I still have some of those tendencies back from the journalism days. So every little gap in the story, I went, how about this? Explain this to me and expand on it. So it was 2:00 before he just said, I gotta go to bed. God bless him, he's fine and all that sort of stuff. I was awake. So that I say all this to you is that I've really been up since about midnight, 12:30, and I will try this again. Okay. Give me the count in.
Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey, Alex Simmons, how are you, man? It is so great to see you. That's Alex Simmons. I'm Chris Ryan. This is Tell the Damn Story. I just told you a damn story, but we've got a lot more for you today. And Alex is going to tell you while I slurp some caffeine.
Yeah, some
Take
tea.
It away, Alex.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, thank you for that story. And frankly, it does tie in a bizarre way to what we're going to talk about today. But first, let me also say,
you know me, I am bizarre.
Tying into your story again, I just want to say that, folks, for those of you who will be listening to this, Lord knows when, last weekend was Father's Day.
Yeah.
So you just heard a father having a moment, right? That makes perfect sense. We all get it. So that's one. 2, today's episode is about really one of the 2 tough writing questions that emerging and aspiring and struggling and total pro writers encounter consistently, and that is creating characters and creating dialogue. I tended to, from time to time, throw a question out to the world and see what comes back. And we did that. And we got about a little over 10 responses in particular that we want to explore today. So we're going to be discussing the responses to the question, and I'm going to repeat the question, or I'm actually going to say the question in a moment. We're going to discuss the responses, and we're going to elaborate a bit on them. And then towards the end, so stick around, towards the end, you're going to get a really nice little summary of some techniques that can be applied. And by the brilliance of Mr. Ryan, I know he's going to have another story as an example to underscore what we will have discussed today. So here we go. Yeah. First off, the question I put out to the world a few days ago was the creative quest question. What gives you more trouble, creating a character or writing dialogue, and why? So, Chris, before we go into the questions and responses, before we go into the responses that we got, how would you react to that question? And I know you and I have talked about this on numerous occasions, but just for the sort of lighting the fire a little bit.
I'm going to have to just suck it up, and maybe I'll have to talk to my friend Rebecca She did Creep This Way with How to Become a Horror Writer. And I was supposed to contribute two other small books. One just perfect for this subject. And it really, at this point, it's criminal that I'm not sharing what I have with the world. But I love exploring character, right? And as I have a list of character bio questions, I had taken some class
No, you
somewhere.
don't have a list. You have an
Yeah.
encyclopedia.
Yeah. But they had a couple of questions and they had this form you could fill out. And it fascinated me. It looked like maybe an employment form, right?
Hmm.
Or if you were applying for membership, something, they wanted to see some background, but it was for a character. And I said, where can we go with this? And I just started listing questions and writing questions, character bio questions that went all the way from childhood and all the way through all different aspects of life, whether it's a bank account or dating history or whether left-handed, right-handed, and all these things inform the author about the character. And then from there, the more you know about it, you may never use this stuff, but the more you know, the deeper your understanding of the character and the easier the writing. That's how I addressed the challenge of creating characters. And then dialogue, I was really blessed because I read a bunch of paperbacks growing up with great dialogue. We'll talk about some of those, hopefully talk about books sometime in the future. We should talk about maybe doing that as an episode.
Yeah, yeah. Hint, hint. Nudge, wink, wink. Yeah,
something,
right.
there was something in my eye.
Yeah.
But a couple of them were exceptionally great at dialogue. They had great ears. And I was really lucky. I ran into interviews with these characters, with these authors.
Hmm.
And they always said they listened. They would just go and listen to people talk. And I lived in Parkchester in the Bronx, which is 171 buildings full of people.
The chatter
Right.
never stops.
So, well, when you hung out, you wouldn't hang out. Some places you're hanging out, you got two or three people, four or five people. This was 20, 30, 40 people behind the ball field or something like that, right? So I was quiet and shy to begin with, which it's obvious if you watch any of these episodes. So I would listen. And then I started listening. They had talked about cadences in this interview. So I looked up what that meant. I was young. And then I said, okay, this guy's voice goes up, and this guy always has a physical, like my brother Soupy, God bless him. He had a tendency to tap whoever he was talking to on the arm
Yep.
while he was talking to him. So I said, wow, it can be a physical communication as well. Who looked who right in the eye, who always looked away, who dropped an F-bomb in every sentence, who would slip in if you're one-on-one with someone, they'd have a bigger vocabulary, but in the group, they would hold that back. And that's how I started really learning dialogue. One of the things you need to do for both of these is embrace rewriting. Because for both of these things, a writer can get carried away.
Absolutely.
And that's okay.
Absolutely.
Then the rewrite should be reduction and clarification. So that's how I approach those.
I'll share my
I don't think of them as problems or challenges. I think them as that's the fun stuff.
Let me throw mine in.
Selling, that's the problem.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to what you just said. So one, whereas Chris was in a circumstance where he had heard people talk about how they approach, oh no, better yet, you had this list of, you got inspired to create this list of character bio questions and everything. I wasn't conscious of any of that when I was writing, as I was struggling to, especially in my teen years, so I was struggling to tell stories. So mine was more organic in that I unconsciously loved stories. It's not like I'm sitting, oh, I love stories. I must read, I must watch, I must. No, it was just like, it was like candy. It's like stories. So television was stories, movies were stories. I was not one who hit the library every week. Sometimes it would be a month or two before you could get me anywhere near a library, but then I'd grab 3, 4, 5 books and I consumed them. like,
Right.
and then again, you couldn't get me near the library.
Yeah.
But this was like stories. So I had two great friends at the time. We're talking about between the ages of 13 and 15. And we had very active imaginations and liked to pretend to be heroes and stuff like that. And one of the parents of one of my friends had a Super 8 millimeter movie camera. So we couldn't just go and pretend and just do stuff in front of the camera. We had to have a story to perform. And we had to have a costume. We had to have, so I started writing the stories. And then my two friends and we would do the costume thing and go out in Central Park or on the rooftop of the building, the tenement building we lived in, and just do our thing. And so to me, it was even thinking about beginning, middle, and end. It was beginning and some stuff happens and then there's the end. And it wasn't structured, but somehow I knew that the character had to start somewhere, or my heroes and villains started somewhere, and there was a clash of some sort. And then we would win out in the end because at that point in my life, good always triumphed over evil. Oh boy. Yeah, it was a blissful time, I gotta tell you. Okay.
I
So,
have to correct what might have been an assumption on your part. I didn't have that list until well into the later half of my 20s. That's when it started.
okay.
As a teenager, what I had was my friend Roger Ross. I've talked about him on the show before. He was one of the smartest human beings I've ever met. And back when we were teenagers, we both liked comics. He had all these comics that I never saw before. So whenever we went over to his house, we'd just pull them off the shelf and look at them and all that, sort of read them. But when we got a little older, like you said, 13, 14, 15, all you said you had friends who all were into it.
I had two friends. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
It was us. It was
I had Roger, and if I mentioned it to anyone else, it was that Bronx. What the hell? What are you doing? What are you stupid? You could and all that stuff. There was a summer of Stephen King where everyone was reading The Shining. And I was like, wow, we're getting literate. And then that never happened again. Or at least they never talked about it in big numbers again. But Roger would come over. We always, in those days, it was like you had to have a jeans jacket, right? We called them Dungaree jackets back then. He would always come up to me and be like, hey, check this one out. And when no one was looking, he would pull out a paperback and give it to me, and I would have to put it in my inside pocket so no one could see it. And
you're doing a book deal, like a drug deal?
Yeah. That's where, if you ever see me do the Neighborhood Connect, that feeling of what it was like, that's
where that came from.
Bow to that. But it was Kurt Vonnegut, it was Robert E. Howard, it was just tons of people. He was always more literate than me. When we would write stories together, his stuff was always better than mine. He had more to draw from. So I learned that the more I took in, the more I would have to draw from. And we were Who fans. He turned me on to the Who and Tommy and Quadrophenia. So we wrote a rock opera together. Never had any music to it, but it was that friendship that
creative
me writing.
Expansion, right. Again,
stories and sent them to, remember Twilight Zone magazine?
Yep.
Yeah. So I guess the point here is, if you have one friend that says, yeah, this is cool, but just someone to help push you in or let you know that it's okay to be interested. That's gold. That's gold.
Solo.
I mean, I don't know what it was like in your side of the Bronx or in Manhattan, but on my side of the Bronx, it was the land of no.
I hear you.
That peer pressure
for me,
not to engage in intelligence.
My situation was
or intellectual activity.
My situation was such that there's again, trying to be as succinct as I can be. My early childhood, I was in one neighborhood, and then my middle to high school years, I was in another neighborhood. And so the neighborhood that I was in predominantly, my middle to high school years, that was a world where I was the odd one out. So I was surrounded by predominantly in middle school and the last 2 years of elementary school, I was surrounded by middle class families. So they had books, TV, that sort of thing. The latter part of my middle school and through my high school years, I was living in more of a lower working class or impoverished area. And so again, different vibes. Some people had television, that sort of thing. But the people around me were into music, or they were into sports, or they were into a part of the urban existence. And there were just a few people here and there that would openly talk about reading, openly talk about
Yeah.
movies, other than as that thing you go to on a Friday or Saturday night. And if you're old enough, you're sitting in the back macking out. And for those who don't know what that is, do the research.
It
The
didn't have
reality,
anything to do with the computer.
yeah, no, not at all. Not even close. So for me, the scenario, especially since I was not in the back macking, for me, it was stories. It was the characters. It was also because, again, coming through a family situation with a single parent and no fat wallet, movies and certain television shows, especially the ones that took place in other countries where the stories went to other, this was my passport to the rest of the world.
Right, right.
And so being engaged with those stories, I suddenly became aware of different cultures and different languages and different speech patterns and things like, and all of that was just feeding me,
Right.
but I wasn't consciously thinking about I'm going to become a writer.
Oh,
At some
yeah.
point,
Yeah.
I started thinking I would become an actor. And even then, I hadn't seen that all this stuff I'd been absorbing since maybe the age of 5 was
Yeah.
going to have any kind of influence on where I was going to now go, what my trajectory was going to be like, and what
Yeah.
was my performing years, how that was going to affect my writer years. So
Yeah.
again,
Well,
coming back to the list, though, coming back to the
well,
list just for a moment, um, creating characters, creating dialogue as a writer or an actor is a challenge. For some people, it's a challenge we welcome absolutely with open arms. And ooh, what can we do with this? And then for others, it's like climbing, it's like free climbing. And it gets scary the higher up you get. So I think that's part of what we're going to try and address this episode is how some people deal with that or how some people feel about that. So can I start with one of the comments?
yeah, I just want to clarify that my Bronx neighborhood was saturated with culture, but it was like, did you see Saturday Night Live? Or everyone would go and see Jaws, and everyone had radios, whether they were 8 tracks, yes, I'm that old, or cassettes, or just radio. And it was the 70s. There was so much amazing rock and roll and soul and R&B. My core group was more rock and roll and everything, but I had older brothers and sisters. Barney would bring home Marvin Gaye and Ellen, a lot of Motown, me and Mrs. Jones and all that sort of
Mhm.
stuff. It was coming everywhere. My father was a Johnny Cash. All these, he liked Johnny Cash, and he liked the Irish Rovers. There wasn't a lot else that he told me
Irish
about.
country.
Yeah, it was those two things. And I mean, he had 4 kids and then 5 kids by the time I was aware of music and stuff. So I think he was just trying to, there was just way too much noise in this little apartment with 5 kids. He didn't want to add to it. But
Mm.
if everyone was gone and I was inside reading, I would hear live from Folsom Prison or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. In
So
tag, you know.
let's move on. We've had fun and had conversation, but now it's time to get into business, sir.
Yeah, business. Okay.
We're done with the monkey business.
Yeah. Since I did not ask for permission to use names, I will just go with this first one here. One of the first ones that dropped in to the an answer to the question was said, my characters materialize and come to me already formed. I struggle with the dialogue because I have issues with the why of the story.
Mm-hmm. I think
Now,
I answered that person.
let's see if you did. You did reply. You did say, I hear you. I've even talked. No, I said that. I said, I hear you. And we've even talked about it. Still struggling, send a couple of questions. And then you said, yeah. So you responded to that question. I don't think you actually
I
answered.
think that go right below that. I think I added after that.
All right, let's see here. No.
All right, it's somebody.
Yeah, it's somebody
Uh,
else. Because I mean that kind of question came up a few times. Again,
so yeah.
the why of a story. I often, when I speak to my students, I often speak about why did you choose this particular story, or why did you choose to explore this particular theme? What are you trying to say with your story, or what are you wrestling with? And they look at me sometimes going, huh? It's just a story about, yeah, but why did you choose this story? And then they'll think about it and they'll say, because of this. And I'll say, okay, so why was that important to you? And then they'll think harder or deeper and they'll go, oh, because such and such. Oh, I said, so now you're looking at what are you actually exploring, or what are
Right.
you actually trying to say through these characters with this story? And that sort of helps them find the bullseye that they're looking for, or at least gives them an idea of what trail to go down. Yeah, go ahead.
I find that's interesting that the approach you're taking there is asking the author why the author is doing these
Mm-hmm.
things. My tendency is to ask why this character? Why is this character in this situation? What about this person has brought him, her, them to this situation that you're going to explore? What made them the person that you saw in that situation? What do you know about this character? And I love when wow. Um,
For those of you who are only hearing this show, he's getting
but,
the puzzled look on his face,
yeah,
i.e., this
yeah.
is what a writer might
The
respond. What? Huh? Huh? Wow.
Well, this is my character. That's great. That's great. Why is this character in this story? Why isn't that character a sailor on a ship somewhere? What made this character? And they start talking about, or it's how would I know? So ask your character questions. Walk around with your character. Give yourself permission to dream, right? Dream, all right, this character is going to be a shoe salesman, but gets stuck in a bank when there's a bank robber. Okay, great. That's fantastic. Why does it matter that the shoe salesman is there? He's got to get out. Why? It's his daughter's christening or communion or whatever. Okay. Why can't he miss that? There's stress in the marriage. I was like, all right, keep
Yeah,
going, keep
yeah,
going.
yeah, yeah.
And the more you play, and you're allowed to come up with crap answers. And if they don't age well for you, when you're sleeping, they leak out of your ear and make space for new
Staying on your
possibilities.
pillow.
So
Um,
play. Yeah, you got to play.
I would say that it's funny. I think that what we actually do, because I do use your method sometimes too, but what we actually do is we just choose two different corridors that eventually wind back at the same space.
That's
Because
fun, isn't it?
eventually they become more aware of the why of the story. In other words, they become either more aware of the why for the character or the why for themselves. And that still gives them a path to explore now to move forward, which I think is great because, again, as I've often said to many of my students, the difference between being a creative and being a machinist in a car factory is we're not out to replicate the exact same parts so they all fit together the exact same way.
Right.
We as creatives are going to influence what we create by the very virtue that it filters through who we are. And so that changes things right there. Yeah. Okay. So, this person saying that the dialogue is a challenge for them because they forget the why. So I think what Chris and I have just danced with here is two different ways of exploring the why in your story or of your story so that possibly that information, however you get it, by yourself or by the character, through the character, uh, gives you a direction.
Yep.
And I think, again, going back to what we said about characters and knowing your characters, and I know we'll repeat it again as we keep going, the more information you have about your character, the more you know about where your character's head is, the more that impacts on exactly how you utilize them, what they say,
Right.
what they do, what they feel. Okay. So let me get to this next one here. Creating a character for me is the easy part, but coming up, oh, here we go again. But coming up with original dialogue is difficult. I want my character to sound unique. So when I read that, I thought, okay, I may know what you mean, but let me probe a little bit deeper. So I said, just for my own clarity, when you say unique, do you mean you want them to sound different from any other character, or do you mean something else? And the person responded, yes, I don't want them to sound stale with expected dialogue. So I think another way one might refer to that is stereotypical type of dialogue that everybody can anticipate. I knew he was going to say that. I knew she was going to do that, that sort of thing. What would you say, Chris?
Why is the dialogue stale is the first thing that comes to my mind. When you read it out loud, what's the stale? What explain further, say more about the stale. And I think again, it's going to wind up back with character. Character is plot is character, story is character. You can do a New York City accent.
Hmm.
And you'll say, oh, that's stale. What accent is this? Where is this guy from? And is it set in the 70s, 80s? Is it set in 2024? Because the Bronx, Queens, Manhattan, Brooklyn, all have changed dramatically since we were young, right?
Yeah, it's back in pioneer days.
It is what it is, right? But the person who is speaking in a Bronx accent, it's a different accent in 2024. It might be Spanglish, it might be something more, but there's very little of those Irish or Italian talking out the side of his mouth kind of guys. So this sounds more Brooklyn to me, but because it's a different world now. It's a different, right? And that's one of the beautiful things about New York City is it keeps inventing itself.
Hmm.
But you might be writing a story about Milwaukee. What are the changes there? Or you might be talking about a farm that has been in a generations or in a family for generations. What's the cadence? Do they speak like the grandfather speaks? What influences, for all its sins? This bad boy is exposing people to so many different cadences and so many phonetic tendencies that even someone who's in a farm in Tennessee, right, a horse farm in Tennessee, still hears English accents, Canadian accents, a Floridian accent, New York. So we can use all of that to inform, and then we have to ask that where's the character from? What is the situation? Who are they speaking to? All of that creates the path to uniqueness, right? If you know the character and you know the character's relationship with their parents or grandparents or the town religious leader, whoever that might be, the very same conversation is going to be different, right? Even if you say, "How you been? What'd you have for dinner last night?" It's going to be different to your parents than it is to your buddy, different to a romantic partner that you have cheated on and went to dinner with somebody else. That's a way different and more unique. The next thing you do, and that's you get it written, the next thing you do is read it out loud in character voices. And the things that fall flat and the things that sound stale, that doesn't kill your story. That invites you to go and work that. All right, how else can that character, not you, the author, but how else can that character say it? To be true to the story and to be true to the character is where you get uniqueness. It always kills me when I'm reading a story and someone has used a thesaurus for dialogue.
Yeah,
very few characters that will be successful for.
I'm wondering too. I'm wondering too if, and a lot of what you say absolutely applies. I'm wondering too if some writers, when they use that reference, the word stale, that if they're also meaning, because because that's another thing. If the person were in front of us, we would ask more questions of them. But I'm wondering if they also mean that I've heard so-and-so say this before. I've heard so many characters say this before. A blonde talks this way, a black guy from the streets talks this way, blah, 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 blah. So I've heard these lines before, and I can't seem to come up with new lines for them. So I'm thinking to a lot of what you said, absolutely. It comes back to character. It comes back to who is this character? What are they going through? But more importantly, no one black person is exactly like another. No one woman is exactly like another. Building up your character, for me, the bottom line is building up your knowledge of your character so that you come up with a true version of that person.
Right.
Then whatever they say is authentic to their experience within that story. Whether or not what they say has been said by Leonardo DiCaprio in another film is inconsequential, because what you're going to be doing is through that character's own filter, you know what this means to them at that moment, and how the opposing character, an antagonist or supporting character, responds is going to make it a different experience altogether.
Right. And what does Aaron Arkin say?
Excuse me?
What's Aaron Arkin say? He says, Aaron Sorkin, excuse me.
Oh, Sorkin, yeah.
Yeah. He says every scene has to have intention and obstacle, right?
Yeah.
So what's your character's intention in that scene, and what's the obstacle, right?
Absolutely.
It's usually another character.
And
if you are finding stale, then, I don't want it to be just another blonde. Then why is she or he, whichever blonde it is, or they, why is that person not just another blonde?
Right. But again, what you were talking about before goes right to it. Again, you could be thinking, okay, this person's 21 years old, they're young, it's their first job or their first relationship, blah, 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 blah. And you got all the stats to the situation there. But whether or not that person was raised Catholic, Buddhist, atheist, whether or not they were raised by their mother and father or by a grandmother because one of their other parents died or both parents died or whatever, all of those other things that you would build by responding to a character bio questionnaire, all of those things that you develop influences how this blonde is going to deal with this situation.
Right.
So again, stale is not, if you want stale, if you're afraid you're doing stale, then that means that you have put them in a stereotypical scenario and you're having them say all the stuff you've heard said before. But if you're doing your homework, then you have less to worry about in that particular realm. And then rewrites will help you hone that even further.
Rewrite is your very best friend as a creator.
Absolutely. It's not
Let us throw the gloves off for a minute and get some tough love for authors. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
If you're saying, I don't want it to be stale, I don't want it to be like every other, where did your character idea come from? Did you think, I want this to be an Emily Clark type, or who's trying to think of a current actor or actress?
Again,
go into the Wayback Machine. Again, those are me and you. They're current to me and you.
Oh, Taylor Swift. Yeah.
All right. Taylor Swift's not an actress, but sure, let's put her in.
She's a performer.
Right? So if you're thinking of that character still as, in using your example, as Taylor Swift, I would politely suggest that you have a higher tendency for creating stale dialogue, because you're echoing what you've heard her say. You have to go beyond. All right, if the casting originally in your head was Taylor Swift type, then again, that's where your character questions, your character bio questions come in that help focus. She's not Taylor Swift. She's, Rona Jordan, or whatever your character's name is. And the more you know about Rona, the less she sounds like Taylor, the more alive and fresh her actions and dialogue will be. And the only way to do that is to write it, let it suck, and read it out loud and make a mark. Don't beat yourself up, because this is the process.
That's right.
Make a mark.
And not making a car.
How would she say that? how would Rona say that? And start thinking of your characters in as themselves, right? This goes back a couple of episodes ago where your students were using X, Y
Yeah, I knew you were
for
going to go into the
characters.
name thing. Hold that for the end.
Whether it's but thinking of a character as an X or a Y,
Hold that for the end,
it's got to
please,
be a
please,
person.
please, because
Okay, okay.
that's a good one. That's a good one.
Hey,
Hold that
stay
for the
around for the ending because I'm going to say that again, and
yeah,
it'll sound fresh.
yeah, and
And if you
he'll
can't
say
wait
it
for
with even
that,
more detail, even more detail.
that's why
Okay,
you
so
hit the like and subscribe,
funny
people.
you should mention names because it segues very nicely into the next one. He says here, making sure I pick the right name that I use that I haven't used elsewhere is usually the hurdle for me when I create a new character. So let me say that
Is
again.
that
That's Bobby Nash. I
yeah,
can't
Bobby,
say his
the
name
one
because
and
he's been on
only,
the
the
show.
Bobby Nash?
Yeah. Making sure I pick a name that's not in use elsewhere is usually the hurdle when I create a new character. And then I responded, I got you. If you don't mind me asking, though, what do you use to help make that decision? Research, intuition, or looking at the world around you, to name a few, right? A few options. So then Bobby comes back with, I usually toss the first 3 or 4 that pop into my head as I assume I've heard them elsewhere. So he throws those away. Then I do a Google search. Then I start playing with the name. What will the character's friends call them? Do we have good nickname potential? That sort of thing. Then I see how it works when the character starts interacting to make sure it flows. So
Ladies and gentlemen,
that's Bobby. That's Bobby B. Yeah.
that's why they call him the Bobby Nash,
Yeah. That's
because
I'm
he
sure
does
someone
his
does call
work.
him.
He does his work, and you can look up Bobby's offerings. He's got a ton of books out. As a matter of fact, he's in the upcoming Soul Scream anthology because he is the Bobby Nash.
Now we're
But that
gonna comment.
idea of
We're gonna
playing and looking deeper and where else can I go? Yeah, yeah, it's starting to sound a little bit like you're naming your baby. Yeah, yeah, that's
yeah.
what it is.
That's right. And we're going to go a little bit deeper into that towards the end of the episode. So let us go here.
Uh,
Here we go. Here we go. Now this is interesting. And I love the icon that he used. If those of you who do Facebook, you have these different icons, and these little characters, these GIF characters he used. He's got one. It's a drop the mic icon, but it's a dude with like dark black sunglasses on, black t-shirt or sweater or something like that, dropping the mic. Looks like George Carlin. I know that's an old name for some of our listeners. Like George Carlin's like a white beard and everything. He's dropping the mic like he's Dr. Cool. And what this person basically said was lyrics. That was his response to the question, lyrics. And I responded to that, songs tell stories. So I hear you. And this person responded, yeah, in effect, visually. When you think about, and I know this may sound like, oh, we're talking about writing stories, we're talking about writing books, we're talking about writing scripts. I said, we're also talking about writing song lyrics because there are a number of songs, no matter what the style that you're into, that are telling stories. It's not just a series of actions that are happening or cool sounding or some beats or things. There's actually a beginning, middle, and an end to an experience someone had, a love affair, a party one night, a life experience that was tragic or wonderful. These are very true stories. It's almost like haiku in a way. Instead of a 5,000 word short story, you've got a 25 word or 35 word story with music. So I don't know, do you have, in your experience, Chris, any songs that you could see or can recall that were storytelling?
yes, I have three answers for them. First one, a paraphrase from Amy Winehouse, the late great Amy Winehouse, and I think her movie is called Amy, and it's worth seeing. Everything about Amy Winehouse was traceable back to her family and her experience. Her hairdo, the music that she created, the tattoos, everything was. And at one point, she said, I have to live and before I can write songs. And then I write songs about what I have to go out and live. right? And to me, that is the job of any kind of creative. You gotta live it, feel it, experience it, then bring it back creatively, right? Okay, second thing I want to say, Motown, an amazing collection of American stories, extremely, and it's wonderful. There's a thing called the Motown Story. It's a big box set, and I don't know, 6, 7 albums, and you hear from the very bubblegum safe space to the more exploratory, the more self-reflective, the more personal stories. So going through that, you hear, all right, we're gonna write this hit. And anyone could have listened, could have played or sang the Diana Ross and the Supremes first hit, say, or the Temptations first hit. And sometimes Ain't No Mountain High Enough, it would be recorded one place, then recorded somewhere else. And there's a couple of songs early in there. But by the time they got to the late 60s, early 70s, only the Temptations could do those songs that they were doing. Runaway Child, Running Wild, I Know I'm Losing You, I Wish It Would Rain. A ton of people have covered them, but the blueprint was so authentic. So and then the direction Stevie Wonder went, the direction that Marvin Gaye went, on it goes, right? You get to see how music and lyrics became more alive, the more personal and the more experiential material was explored. I want to go my third point, I want to go to Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan has been, and the Beatles too, but Bob Dylan has been covered by everybody. But if you hear Bob Dylan play and sing and perform To Make You Feel My Love, there's a heartbreak in it. But then you hear Adele do that. It's a completely different heartbreak. And the reason that you could experience two completely different heartbreaks with the same set of lyrics is because it's what the artist brings to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that, for each one of you creatives, that is the key. What are you bringing to this lyric, to this character, to this story? What's living in you that needs to be there? And the more you write, the more that comes across. Yeah, that's the way to go. I hope that
love
answered your
that. I love
question.
that. I love that. And I would also just add one other name to the list because you ran such a wonderful list. But and again, this is a name that maybe some folks out there will not know.
Sure.
Harry Chapin wrote he wrote a number of songs, but he wrote 4 really exquisite storytelling songs. And everything from Taxi, where it's lamenting a relationship that didn't work out and 2 people went their separate ways and years later come across each other, and one has got this rich household situation and supposedly is all success and everything, but is lonely, and the driver of the cab is a cab driver, but he feels complete. And there's that one. So from something like that to Cats in the Cradle, with a father being disconnected from his child, growing up and growing up until the child is a man, and now the disconnect is coming from the other direction, but did the child learn that disconnect or whatever? That was heartbreaking. To Sniper, which was epic and literally was about a sniper who goes up on a rooftop and begins shooting people. And he covers the whole experience within that one song, from the sniper's POV, from the news people's POV, from some of the victims' POV, from the people who are the bystanders. It is this complete, almost like a television episode within this song. And the very last line of that song, which I will give because no, you can't be a spoiler, is as the SWAT team is converging on this killer because they've got to stop him. They've got to take him out. He's screaming, "I am, I shall be, and now I will be." And so that sums up that in this unfortunate human being's frame of mind, the things he just did was all about being seen and
Yeah.
being known and relevant. And so these are stories. And again, the ones that Chris mentioned and the ones the two, three or so that I'm mentioning now, it all very much is influenced, as Chris said, by the artist who creates the piece or who covers the piece.
It would be an interesting for the guy who said lyrics. It'd be an interesting for them to, because you can look it up on YouTube or whatever music subscription you have. Look up Harry Chapin's Sniper, and then Peter Gabriel's Family Snapshot. Same scenario. And how did one person do it? How did the other person do it? In Family Snapshot, he's going to kill a president. And in such limited lyrics, we realize the deep need of these people. If you don't get, you learn to take, and I will take you. Shooting to the light. He's going to become famous now, right? That kind of, oh my God. Yeah. Another way to look is you and I both know about the live experience of music, and watching performers perform their creations is amazing. But watching the audience respond to that, and what they respond to and how they respond, and the timbre and tone of sometimes joy, sometimes emotional recognition. And I've seen you two do it. I've seen Bruce do it. But in the last couple of years, I've tried to go to see things that my kids or their friends were into. Every once in a while, I'd ask, I said, do you mind if I'll just sit in the back? I just want to. I experienced Billie Eilish, and I think she's fascinating. Her and her brother, they're like a Steely Dan of this generation. Two people creating all this music, but to watch her interact with a very young audience. And some of her lyrics are really dark, but they were connecting to the emotional catharsis. And you could just feel it wafting off the. I recently asked one of my son's fiance. She's a big Taylor Swift fan. And Disney has that concert, right? It's not the same as going to a live show. And I would never sit through it myself because I don't know the music. So I asked her to be a tour guide. And I'm looking forward to that. Let's just sit, we'll have dinner, whatever, and we'll drink some wine and we'll put this thing on. And anything that you think I should know about this song or that song. And I want to see what she sees because she's a Swiftie, right? The loyalty. Yes, my son says that woman is a cult leader. And he means it in the best way. Taylor Swift's fans, their allegiance to her.
Yeah. And
I'm interested in what that means. It's like Stephen King's fans. They connect to something.
There was a guy who, I'm not going to repeat it now because I'm also clock watching, but there was a guy who just the other day in a presentation of his own spoke about his experience, and he's beyond the age range of Taylor's usual crowd, but was speaking about watching her live at a huge concert where there were 70,000 people. And he spoke about watching her and watching them. So in the green room, I'll share that with you.
Okay.
All right. We only have time for maybe one more of these. So
I'm sorry, I get so excited by your question.
We'll do this again. Here's one. It's exposition and describing the scene. So let me start that again. It's exposition and describing the scene that's an absolute bugbear because my brain mostly thinks like a movie script. It's all action and dialogue lines. So that's
you and I, Alex, approach this almost diametrically opposite positions.
You start.
I agree with this person about approaching it almost like a movie script. What I try to do, or a comic book script, I've had that experience working with you and all that sort of stuff. I am really stingy with expository details. If you're going into a deli in one of the scenes in my book, or if the characters are, I assume most people know basically what a deli is. Now, if one of the characters is going to pull a salami from hanging overhead and use it to stop a robbery or something, that'll be worked into detail. There'll be cheese and salami hung in front of this, and there was there. And the back was a. If I'm giving you a lot of detail, it's because it's a unique space, or you have to set that up for what's going to happen in the scene.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really rare that every time a character enters a room, we have 2 or 3 paragraphs of just Elmore Leonard. Try not to write the stuff that people skip over. That's one of his 10 rules, right? And I took that to heart, baby. And there are times where in rewrite, in the second or third draft of the rewrite, I'm looking to condense those details or condense dialogue. Anything that repeats something that was already there that doesn't necessarily need to be repeated. But that's my approach, is a little more minimalist and accepting that they know what this is going to look like. And then I'm working on now, am I giving too little? And so that's, I've added a draft where I go back, and if it's not me, will people understand where they are? Maria San Giovanni said that she hates reading students or writers who create white room or void scenes. And what she means by that is it's like me and Alex meet. Hey, this, we're going to do a robbery. And you don't know where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no descriptive. So it would just, for her, it's always just looks like a white vacuous space. So I learned that from her. I'm more aware, am I creating that or not? So that's my approach. Now, Alex, different thing altogether. Sir?
I'm a mood person. I agree with you that to fall in love with the sound of one's own voice is detrimental to telling a good story.
Right,
so
but I don't think you do that.
Excuse me?
In your own defense, I don't think you do that.
Oh, good. Thank you, because that's not my aim.
That'll be $10.
Yeah, no, you said 25. Okay, that's not important. What I do feel at times is I need to set a sense of mood or tone. And so sometimes I will spend a few moments, a sentence, 2 or 3, depending, to create a flavor to the space or to avoid the white room with white curtains at the station. There you go. Yeah, that was for Chris.
That was a really quick Alex Simmons time machine. Very like 7 words, and he got it there.
Yeah.
Cream reference here on Tell the Damn Story.
So go ahead. So I just want you to know I'm paying attention here. I will do that. And sometimes it's, sometimes I will write something and again, in rewrites, it is your friend. It is a safety net. And I will explain that in a moment. But I will write my first draft, my rough draft. I will write what I feel I need to experience or say or set up on that page. And sometimes writing a little bit more exposition helps me get into that space because I'm seeing the space. I'm seeing the environment. I'm seeing the atmosphere. I'm feeling the temperatures or whatever it is. And I'm having that moment and I establish it there. And then when I go back to read through it, or cut maybe like the third rewrite, I've gone, no, haven't pared it down enough. But I want to make sure that I've created some sense of atmosphere. And to this particular person's scenario, I get it. I think that literally you can, like I said, I write sometimes I put more on the page the first time I'm writing it, because that's also me actually seeing the space that I'm in. But you can also do the opposite. You can just write dialogue and write some physical actions to help you with setting up the sense of that scene. And when you go back second, third, or fourth rewrite, start adding in bits and pieces of terrain or elements or things like that that help establish that space so they're not in a white room. I don't know that there's a methodology that one has to adhere to, because again, we are different creatives, each one of us. So a different style that could work for Chris or for me might not work for somebody else. And part of it is understanding what Chris and I try and share are tools, different methodologies, different tools that you can put on your belt or hang on your metaphorical wall, tool wall, right? And just know that while you're writing, oh yeah, I can reach up and I can use this one now. Or I have this set I've never touched, but I know it's there. That's really what we're doing. And I'll just add one more quick thing to that. I had a time at one point in my life, I was writing a story about poaching on game preserves in Africa. And I'd never been to Africa. And I knew that I could watch movies and I could watch documentaries and I could read books and I could get all kinds of research and bits and pieces and fabricate some sense of Africa, one dimension. But I also wanted to actually go. And I managed to take some of the advance that I got and get on a camera tour, camera safari. And I went to Africa. And I've never regretted that for a number of reasons. But one reason in particular is the sensory experiences I had that I never would have gotten from any of those other methodologies that I mentioned. To actually be there, to know what it feels like, to feel the heat on my body, to the sense of the smells and things that were there, to be approximately 5 or 6 feet from an elephant or herd of elephants or a water buffalo, a single water buffalo who was bigger than the Volkswagen van that I was in, to have that visceral experience as the thing looked at us, to know what that felt like, to learn that hyenas are not those goofy little things that laugh hysterically in zoos and out on the plains, that they are predators. And to see one take it down and to see the animals that it was chasing, that once it got one of them, the others stopped barely 10 feet away and began grazing, because the law of their life is the predator had what it wanted. We are safe for now. And I remember one person in the van said, I can't wait to get back to civilization. And I said, I'm not sure that's actually where we live. Because in a person to person, a human situation, somebody running around attacking, getting one doesn't guarantee that everybody else is safe.
True.
So I think that sometimes the details help create the world for you, the writer. And yes, obviously you can place your character within it, but it doesn't mean that you have to keep all the details in. And learning what needs to stay or what needs to be there and what you can cut away is a process in time that you'll get better at.
There we go.
Yeah.
Nicely said. I have some other things to say, but I'm keeping it for what we promised.
Yes. So here we are at the end of the episode, and we have that little goodie bag, and that goodie bag is going to go right over there to Chris, and you can start it.
All right. So let's go from what you were just saying. I worked in John Philip Sousa Middle School for 5 years in the Bronx. And there was a social studies teacher there, very nice guy, very erudite, very dry wit and all that. But across the front of his classroom, in one of those dot matrix, remember those printers?
Yep.
But written,
you still hear it
really huge, was this one saying, the map is not the territory. And that's exactly what you're trying to say to writers right now. Yes, we can YouTube almost anything and see somewhat of it. But going there and smelling the smells and feeling the texture and breathing the air and feeling the way the sun hits there, as opposed to the not so wild sections of New Jersey or the Bronx or whatever, is a completely different thing. The map is not the territory. So go out, live your life. We're not saying go around the world. You do what you can afford to do, right? But being out with your ears and eyes open, and occasionally remind yourself to smell the smells and feel what your arms, the hair on you, what makes the hairs on your arms stand up or whatever. Those things are things that will enrich your writing. Secondly, one of the big things that we have said here is serve the story, yes, but not in the first draft. In the first draft, get the story down. I always say let it suck, meaning don't sweat whether it's great. Just get the story down, and everything, sometimes overwrite, sometimes and if the dialogue is stale, then this draft, keep going. And if you're not sure if you're in a white room or over explained or described room, don't worry about it, keep going, get the whole story down. And then embrace the most powerful tool you have as a writer, and that is rewriting. Rewriting is what makes stories great. This idea that first idea, best idea is your enemy. Get the story down, and then craft begins.
Mm.
And that's where I don't need this. This will be work better. This is stale. Who is this character? And you rethink and get to know the character better. And you start seeing it come alive. And that moment where you're writing and the character is telling you the story, that's when you know you have reached where that story needs to be. So all of that is part of the process.
Great. And I will just say that part of what I said a few moments ago about my time in Africa is a part of my little grab bag at the end here. And then the other end of that is going back to the thing about names. Literally, as Chris and I will have said 1,000 times, and this is what, episode 317 of our show. We've said it 1,000 times. We'll say it 1,000 more times. Your character is not a cutout. It's not a marionette. It's not a shadow puppet. The character has to be a living, breathing entity within that story. And in order for that to happen, you have to know that character, your friends, or like a relative. And you don't call your parent X. You don't call your best friend number one. You don't do that. They have a name. They have a history. They have a backstory. They have personality. They have a cultural connection to the world in some way, shape, or form. There are things that make them absolutely who they are. And one of them is identified by what you call them. When you can think of your character as him, her, then you're dismissing them to a certain degree. And that's not allowing you to be as informed as you need to be so that you don't have to worry about being stale or stereotypical or flat.
Let me suggest an example of the exception underscoring the rule. Cormac McCarthy, The Road. In that, I recently saw a complaint about that book. And the complaint was the father was the worst father in the world. What father in literary history? He didn't even bother to name his son. And I realized that this person had possibly missed the point of The Road. The Road is a dystopian novel told by an absolute master of storytelling. And he stripped down the world is dead. This world that they're in is dead. So he stripped down adjectives, adverbs, all these things that might give emotion. And even to the point of names, they were so up against it that son was all he could refer to this child as. It's fascinating to read that and look at, just read it from a point of view is this person succeeded in this story. What story is this person telling? And it's a story of a world gone dead. And what would it be like? And everything that's missing there reinforces the world created for that story, the experiences of those characters. It is shockingly moving and scary at times and stressful and all that without bombast. It's fascinating to see. My wife, if she was here, Glorious, would say Charles Dickens. And it is long established on this show how I feel about most of Dickens' writing. He hired himself and paid himself by the word. That's all I'm going to say this episode. But McCarthy's The Road is the opposite end of that. And to go there and then say, okay, if my world is alive, what do I allow myself? What does the character experience? It's an interesting exercise in building from the other way.
I would also say, and I'm again, because I'm clock watching, I would also say there are a number of examples of from something as eloquent as this to something as, I'm going to offend probably some favorite folks and things like by saying something as rudimentary as the Johnny Weissmuller Tarzan movies. There's Jane and there's Boy.
Yeah.
There's not Billy, there's not Tommy, and Jane could have named Boy William, but no, there's Boy. And this is what the kid grows up with. Now, at some point in space and time in the books, the stories, he winds up with, it begins with a K, Korak, or I can't remember.
That, yeah.
Yeah, he winds up with another name. But ultimately in the films, it's Boy. And that became a thing. It was okay. It was established as one of the characters. I think, again, doing something deliberate like this, or like Chris is expressing, is different from not getting around to it, not feeling it's important. And that's what I'm saying. It is important to identify your characters, to give them a life and a name and a place and a history is important, because that's where some of your information as a writer is going to come from. And until you embrace that, you're always going to struggle with what should they say, what should they do, and God, it sounds like 1,000 other things I've heard.
Yeah, and I think doing your homework, your character work, and your character bio work before you start writing, and then embracing rewrite after you've written, and asking yourself between write sessions when you're doing the dishes or driving to work or on a train somewhere, ask you, why is this happening? What, and then how does the world affect it, and how? Then you start getting to intentionality in the rewrites, and that is the glory of rewrites. Cormac McCarthy stripped everything down intentionally. Dickens was flowery and embellished because there was no film back then. There wasn't television back then. There wasn't radio. This was the entertainment. So you forgive that it's of its time.
Well, it's also,
why are you telling the story you're telling?
It's
and
how
you're telling it.
That was a different era. No, I'm just saying the different era. That's how people wrote and spoke at that time. So the society that you're in also influences the kind of work that you do in one way, shape, or form. All right. One more thing I'm going to add is that we will, because we're so nice and wonderful, there'll be a link in this show where you can click on that and get a nice little download from us, which may help you with some of the questions that you asked or were presented to us. And thank you, people from Facebook and wherever we're sending those in. And the ones I didn't get to this time, we will definitely get to the next time around. So thank you.
Can we give them a hint as to what that?
Oh, no, because now they have
to. You got to go and see.
Click the link to see what else. That's cool. Yeah, it's not going to bite you. It's going to be a good thing. So just let that be a hint. Okay.
Will it help you tell the damn story?
It damn well will.
There you go.
Take care, everybody.
Peace. If you like this, please hit subscribe and let us know in the comments.